Welcome. I'm Johan Brännmark, and this is my talk, Grounding Social Facts. And it will basically be about what the title says. It will be about grounding and social facts. Now, I'll start with saying a few words about the grounding relation and then move on to how social facts are grounded. So, when it comes to the grounding relation, there is no consensus on the exact nature of this relation. In spite of, or maybe because of, it being a hot topic in metaphysics for at least 10 or 15 years. The following three formal features are often seen as categorizing grounding though. So relevant universal quantifiers being in place, we have transitivity. If X grounds Y and Y grounds Z, then X grounds Z. Anti-symmetry. If X grounds Y, then Y does not ground X. And irreflexivity. X does not ground X. So one thing that should be apparent from these relations is that what characterizes grounding is that it has a very strong directedness. And this also perhaps explains why it is seen as very useful relations, particularly by those who favor an approach to ontology that is not so much focused on just sort of providing a kind of list of what there is, but also in providing kind of structuring of the world, thinking in terms of levels, and here then levels of fundamentality, where some things are relatively more fundamental than others, and perhaps some kinds of facts are absolutely fundamental. And I will set the category of the absolutely fundamental to the side here today, because I think nothing in the social world has a claim to being absolutely fundamental. When it comes to using a grounding theoretical framework in social ontology, this is something that has already been suggested by several authors. But I think there are, so this is kind of a ball that is already rolling. But I think there are some prima facie initial reasons why one might find this attractive. Now, one is that it brings social ontology closer to general metaphysics. So historically, social ontology has sometimes tended towards maybe more philosophy of action, particularly in understanding collective action. But I think at least more broadly understood, social ontology and sort of more general metaphysics should have considerable overlap, and using a grounding framework kind of creates a sort of common tongue in which social ontologists and metaphysicians can speak to each other. Another is that, and this is a thing I think all friends of the grounding relation often point to, is that it provides us with a sharper tool than another type of structuring relation, namely the supervenience relation. So the idea is that the grounding relation allows us to better make sense of relations like dependence and determination because of its strong directedness, whereas supervenience is often more of a covariance relation. As a note, it should also be said that one of the theorists that have emphasized the importance of grounding, Brian Epstein, he also very much emphasizes that we need to have another notion, namely that of anchoring, in order to make sense of social facts. That will be set aside largely here. What will be attempted in this talk is a grounding-only approach. Okay, so perhaps a bit more concretely, what might social ontologists do with the grounding relation? Now, I think that there are at least three tasks here which might be of interest. And the first one is, I think, especially of interest to analytic social ontologists, because analytic social ontologists have often been engaged in trying to explain how things that are constructed can still be real. And here I think the ontological permissivism characteristic of thinking in terms of a grounding relation allows us to precisely make sense of how things that, even if they are sort of very far from being absolutely fundamental, can still be real. It's just that they are sort of higher up this sort of chain of grounding. Social ontology might also provide how possibly explanations of how such complex social facts are grounded. Another task might be to do interlevel metaphysics. So especially if we are working with a layered conception of the world, one question then is how these different layers or levels are related to each other. So if we work with a picture of, say, physics, chemistry, biology, psychology, sociology, political science, and so on. There are questions about sort of how are these levels related to each other. This is something that I don't think that the individual special sciences really address, but that ontologists might want to address. And the grounding relation is potentially useful there. Finally, I think there is an area called abstract social theory, which often both philosophers and social scientists, maybe especially in sociology, are engaged in trying to understand the social realm at its sort of at very abstract and general level. And here there is overlap between sort of philosophical theorizing and empirical theorizing, in that this kind of abstract social theory is, of course, very much empirically informed, but still it also is very theoretical. So what the best theory is will be largely determined by certain kinds of theoretical virtues, and the exact nature of the theoretical virtues and how they are to be weighed in relation to each other. I think that is sort of the domain of the way philosophy can definitely make a contribution. One consequence of moving towards a grounding framework is that a very old debate will likely resurface, namely the debate over methodological individualism, because this is clearly a debate that has to do with relations between sort of more complex social facts or complex social entities and sort of more simple or basic ones. Now, in the contemporary discussion, I think this can already be seen in some of the authors who have moved towards more doing social ontology closer to general metaphysics, like Epstein and Haslanger. Now, the relevant position here is often understood as ontological individualism, so the ontological part of methodological individualism, because a lot of contemporary authors find that explanatory holism is relatively unproblematic, but some of them still insist that they are ontological individualists, even if they are explanatory holists. However, at least within social ontology, these authors like Epstein and Haslanger are both very critical of individualism, even ontological individualism. And one key criticism then is the anthropocentrism of individualism, and that it doesn't really account for the role of material objects in building the social world. We'll get to this worry later on. But I think that as a first step, one should sort of make a friendly attempt at articulating ontological individualism in a grounding framework. So there is some discussion already, but it is largely done by those critical of ontological individualism. So here, what will be attempted here is a more friendly take on ontological individualism. And then within a grounding framework, it is not about reducing or eliminating sort of more complex social objects or more complex social facts. It is about thinking in terms of degrees of fundamentality and perhaps identifying a base layer of basic social facts. So in the traditional debate on methodological individualism and in sort of classic sociology, I think that one of the authors that sort of is most amenable to being brought into something sort of like a grounding framework is Max Weber, because of sort of the way he sort of really thinks in terms of some sort of basic social atoms and then kind of builds more complex social categories based in those. So for Weber, and this is late Weber of Economy and Society, the social atoms are social actions, and a social action occurs when an action, which includes refraining from action, is oriented to the past, present, or future anticipated behavior of others. So this understanding of the social atom is really about understanding something that sort of has taken us across the line from sort of something purely individual to something social, something from non-social to social. So once we have moved to considering the other in our actions, we have moved into the social. So this also gives an explanation of the line between the non-social and the social. Now, in grounding theoretical terms, I think sort of a core theory might look something like this. So we have a first principle that says that a basic social fact is a fact about an individual acting in a way that is oriented to some other actor or actors with respect to possible or actual behavior. Second one, saying that a derivative social fact is a fact that is eventually grounded in some basic social fact. But then I think we also need to add a third one, and I will get to why later on, namely this. A substantive derivative fact, or derivative social fact, is a fact that is capable of playing a causal explanatory role in relation to other social facts. Now, for basic social facts, there is no such distinction between substantive and non-substantive, because since they are about action, facts about actions, they always have this kind of causal explanatory role. But for derivative social facts, I think we will need to draw some kind of distinction like this. But before going into that, I will just try to address some initial words. So one is the one that I've already mentioned, that ontological individualism is too anthropocentric, does not adequately account for the role of material objects in building the social world. Now, I think that as formulated here, ontological individualism gives us quite a bit of tools in integrating material objects into our story of the social world. So to begin with, basic social facts can be facts about individuals relating to other actors vis-a-vis material objects. For instance, some material object might serve as a kind of coordination device between two actors performing social actions. Additionally, derivative social facts can be facts about material objects. And they can also be part of what grounds other derivative social facts, including facts about individuals. So if I am a house owner, then that fact is partly grounded by the existence of a certain house, but that sort of physical structure's status of as a house is grounded in ultimately grounded in facts about our social actions. So there are ways of bringing material objects into the story. Another worry is that understanding groups in very individualistic terms might prove insufficient for accounting for some kinds of more institutionalized groups that have different roles and powers and so on. Now, here again, we need to emphasize that the ontological individualism as formulated here is just a theory about what the basic social facts are. So some facts about groups and even about individual group members can be grounded in facts about non-group members. So if you take something like the Supreme Court, the group of people there can make some kinds of decisions that have some significant impact on people's lives. But those powers, of course, are not just grounded in characteristics, basic facts about these the individuals making up the Supreme Court. They are also grounded in a lot of facts about other individuals and how they behave. So we can think about grounding in much wider terms. Okay, now we get to this distinction between substantive and non-substantive. So take the following two candidate derivative social facts. A1, hyperinflation is a phenomenon that occurred already in ancient Rome, and A2, Genghis Khan was a war criminal. So B1 and B2 give sort of more complex social facts that might be understood as providing the groundwork, at least a partial ground for A1 and A2. Now, what I want to maintain here is that there is a difference between A1 and A2. So while A1 is a substantive social fact, A2 is a non-substantive one. Now, let's look at why. Okay, so we start with substantive derivative social facts. Now, I mean, it's well known that many social facts and the grounding of many social facts involve looping effects. So we have certain concepts, and because we have these concepts, we act in certain ways, certain patterns are established, and certain sort of complex social facts obtained. So there is a kind of our believing certain things make them the case in a way. But it has also been pointed out, for instance, by Amy Thomason, that there are what might be called opaque social facts. So these are facts grounded in our behavior, our social actions, but where we might not understand these sort of more complex social facts. And actually, we can make discoveries about the society, things that aren't transparent to its members. So I think the hyperinflation example is that kind of case. So even if the Romans didn't have a notion of hyperinflation, they still, at least at certain points of time, experienced hyperinflation. or their society suffered from hyperinflation. And we now can label it that way, and we can use that kind of category to understand what happened. So hyperinflation can play a robust causal explanatory role in understanding events that took place at that time, even though people at that time didn't have that concept. However, if we turn to the Genghis Khan example, then I think that's an example of a non-substantive derivative facts. So then the idea is that this kind of sort of categorizing that we do, so let's say that we say Genghis Khan was a war criminal, doesn't do any real joint carving. It doesn't point to anything playing a robust causal explanatory role. At least not one that is not much better played by other concepts or sets of properties. So the brutality of Genghis Khan and the Mongols might sort of be something that explains why many places just surrendered rather than sort of trying to resist. So difficult to say exactly what the best category here and exactly how to carve the joints of the social world at that time. But it seems very unlikely that the exact sort of definitions of the ICC or the Rome Statute in terms of defining war criminal will be what plays the identify facts playing a causal explanatory role for things that happen at Genghis Khan's time. So we could distinguish between a kind of mere label sticking that for contemporary purposes might be perfectly fine. I mean, we might think that Genghis Khan is an example that can be used in certain ways, and then fine, we can call him a war criminal. But this is different from the kind of joint carving that happens when we make a bona fide discovery about society, how the society functioned, and that can be used to explain why certain things took place, or perhaps even why certain things didn't take place. Okay, so given that we accept this definition, or given that we at least understand that might be drawn, there is a kind of worry that I now want to address before closing, and it's that we started out with ontological permissivism as a characteristic, a kind of grounding approach, and also that partly explained why it might be attractive to social ontologists. But by introducing this notion of substantivity and understanding it in terms of what plays a causal explanatory role, the worry is that have we not moved toward what might be called a form of flat worldism instead, sort of separating out the category of the really real, the sort of real facts, from the sort of more sort of pretend fact, or whatever we want to call it. I mean, there is definitely some kind of separating out of different kinds of facts here, but I don't think it's too worrisome. Now, to begin with, even as ontological permissivist, I think it is inevitable that certain facts will have robust explanatory powers and others not. So some such distinction is inescapable. Exactly how it is drawn and exactly how we understand its causal explanatory role and so on. There's a lot to talk about here, but I think some such distinction is inescapable. Additionally, I mean, some social kinds might carve the social world at its joints only for certain societies at certain points in time. I mean, the social world changes in a kind of sometimes a fairly drastic way, in a way that the natural world doesn't. So it doesn't seem that surprising that while certain categories, using them for certain societies at some point in time, might carve those societies at their joints, used at other societies, they sort of can be used to loosely speak about that society, but sort of still that there is a difference there, and that some applications of categories might be anachronistic. Finally, even if this does sort of separate out a certain category of facts as kind of the real facts, there is still, I think, sort of ample room for a layered conception of the world within that set of facts. So we're not giving up on the idea of thinking in terms of degrees of fundamentality and sort of this kind of structuring structuring approach to ontology. So we will still work with a layered conception of the world, even given that we have introduced this notion substantivity. Okay, so that's it for me today. Thank you very much.